we had a little group called West Side Italian Culture. And the goal has always been for those 4 years to get nonprofit status. So when we went to that, I already had this website. We rebooted a Facebook page, and for a broader reach, we've named the nonprofit Italian Portland. So we're just super excited, and we're excited to have Anita as our first guest. I think I will now pass it over. Oh, a couple of housekeeping things. If you would go ahead and please mute your mics during Anita's presentation. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions. She'll show some pictures and we'll have some conversation. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Christina, and she is going to do an official intro of our guest. So thank you and welcome.
Welcome, everybody. We are really privileged this evening to have Anita Sanseverino with us from New Jersey. So she is quite, an honored lady. She's an award-winning photographer, and she has dedicated her photography to the subject of Italy. She's also a lecturer and a scholar of Italian history and culture. She's actually been the recipient of the Woman of Achievement in the Arts in New Jersey, and has exhibited her photos in Italy, Columbus Citizens Foundation, Queens College in New York. She's presented her photographs and lectures in Carnevale di Vicenza, at various cultural centers, museums, and colleges. I could keep going on, but then we wouldn't get to hear Anita. So let me just say a couple more things. She's been interviewed by various newspapers, been featured in magazines in the New York City area, and been interviewed on television and radio programs promoting Italian culture. She was also interviewed by NBC about her exhibit and lecture of the Carnevale di Vicenza at Italian American Museum in New York City. So we're really excited to hear all that she has. She has beautiful pictures to share with you. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Anita, and off you go.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And thank you for all attending. I want to say I'm going to be glancing at my notes. So if you see me looking down, that's why, and my watch to make sure I stay on target. Before I start the formal presentation with the history of Naples, I just want to start out by saying that people who don't consider Naples when they're planning a trip to Italy are missing the real Italy. I have to say this because when people in the United States hear and talk about Italians being larger than life, and we're exuberant, and we love life, and we love food, and we're gregarious, and expressive with our hands and everything else, they're really speaking about Neapolitans, because Northern Italians basically don't act like that. And, they're more subdued. And if you go to Florence, you're not going to have the same kind of exuberance and the outdoor, practically theatrical performances that you will see in Naples. So it's the epitome of the Italian that most people think of when they think of Italians is a Neapolitan, because that's, those are the people that, along with others from the South, came here to begin with. And that's the culture that Americans know about Italians. So if you're missing that part, if you don't go to Naples to see the real thing, then you're really missing Italians. And as far as even the music, the most enduring Italian songs are Neapolitan songs. There's beautiful and regular Italian songs too, but the Neapolitan songs. The food from the South is by far the greatest. And I always feel that there's a vibrancy about a Neapolitan and Neapolitan life that even in spite of hardship, there's still an exuberance for living and making the best of what they can. And if you ever get in a taxi with a Neapolitan taxi driver and you tell them you're either from New York or New Jersey and your grandparents or parents were born there, well, you'll have a friend for life. And conversation will never, never cease. And one of the things that really struck me was when I happened to be in the lucky enough to be at the vigil for San Gennaro, for the Feast of San Gennaro. Like, you know, most places in the United States that have an Italian community have a San Gennaro festival, but I never saw anything like the one there, because they're waiting for the blood to liquefy. And it really means something to the Neapolitans, even for people who are not religious. It has more to do with being, it's a part of the city, it's a part of their culture. And the well-being of the whole city depends on this blood liquefying, because the mythology is that if it doesn't, then disaster will fall on Naples. And in the past, it actually has. There have been years when it didn't liquefy and there was an earthquake, or the volcano erupted, or war broke out. So they are very, very personally invested in this saint. And whether they're religious or not, it's still there. The devotion is still there. And I find that what it gives is a certain humility and a humanity, but that humility, it seems to be lost in our American culture. And it just touched me so much, because they really feel that there's something larger than themselves, whether it's myth or legend or religion, whatever it is, they always feel that there's something larger than themselves, and it shows in their way of thinking and being. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that part before I start the actual lecture, which I will now start by saying she was born Greek. Naples was originally Greek. She was called Parthenope, and she was named after the siren of Greek mythology. There was a settlement in Cuma, which is south of Naples, and those were Greek sailors who settled there. And then they came upland, and they came to an island called Megaride, and that is where today the Castel dell'Ovo sits. But according to myth, Parthenope threw herself into the waters after having failed to lure Ulysses to her shores with her siren song. So she was so upset about this that myth says she threw herself in the waters and killed herself against the rocks. And then when she washed up on the beach of this island, Megaride, the Greek sailors from Cuma who came up found her, and they decided to name their new settlement after her. So the original name of Naples was Parthenope. And that lasted a short period of time, because the place where they started, and this island of Megaride, across the road, where now is a road where cars go, and it's called the Via Parthenope, or across the street is a group of major fabulous hotels, but just behind that is a mountain. It was called Monte Ecchia, and it's still there today, but the whole city is built around it. So you don't even notice that it's there, and there's a military school sitting on top of it. But it's there, and there's also an unknown soldier tomb buried inside. So they're doing construction now, but at one point you could go inside and visit it. But this Monte Ecchia was the limit. So you had Megaride, the island that sticks out into the water, and later you'll see photographs of that. And then that up to Monte Ecchia, including Monte Ecchia, that was the extent of Parthenope. It was a very small place, but it started as a settlement, a trading and merchant settlement. And as things grew, they decided to expand. So they expanded further inland, and that was called the new city, Neapolis. So from that's where we get Naples. So as they expanded further and further inland, it became known as Neapolis, and then Parthenope became known as Paleopolis, the old city. And from that, in the Italian, you get Naples or Napoli. So that's how the whole thing started. And the funny thing is that today, a lot of Neapolitans will still call themselves Parthenopean. They use the term very often, especially with the idea that somebody had of seceding. The North at one time wanted to secede from the south of Italy. Well, the South really wanted to secede from the North. The Neapolitans would love to have their kingdom of the two Sicilies back, but they call themselves Parthenopeans. They use the term very often. Eventually, the Romans came in and obliterated a lot of the Greek buildings. So you don't really see much of anything of the Greek settlements that were there. But in the villa that is now the Castel dell'Ovo, it was at one time a fortress, and it was actually the last place that the last emperor of Rome was exiled, and his name was Romulus Augustulus, and he was in exile. He was a child, and he was the emperor, but he was exiled to this fortress, which eventually became the Castel dell'Ovo. But there's another myth, and I love these myths because they just have so many, and they make historical facts much more fun and interesting. The myth is that the writer Virgil, who was revered in Naples, buried an egg in a box under the castle. And if that egg ever breaks, I don't know how they would find out, but if the egg ever broke, then Naples was gone. That's the end of Naples. So we have San Gennaro at one point. If the blood doesn't liquefy, Naples is going to have a catastrophe. And if Virgil's egg breaks, then Naples just vanishes. So we have all these concerns about Naples. But during the rise of the Roman Empire, the Romans used Naples as their playground. So they took over. They obliterated almost every sign of Greek architecture and Greek living. But the culture of the Greeks remained. So there's even, parts of the language that still have Greek in it. And the place it's a square where the Church of San Lorenzo is. And there's an excavation there. You can go down under the church and see the original Greek and Roman ruins. There's more Roman ruins to be seen, of course. And again, you'll see them in the photos. But what I learned was that if you want to know what the Greek ruins are, look for big, heavy stone blocks, because the Greeks built with blocks of stone. And the Romans learned how to make bricks. So everything that you see that has those narrow bricks, that's Roman. And when you go under this Church of San Lorenzo, which is in a square that at one time was part of the Greek marketplace called the Agora, that's where Greek life was the highlight. Like their forum was the Agora, and that was the big marketplace. So it's possible to go down there and see all of this. And they had everything. And it's actually below ground, but at the time that it was, the Greek site, and even later on for the Romans, it was ground level. So now everything was buried on top of it, and now you have a different layer, just like in Rome, you have layers of the city. So it was the same thing there. So after, they kept their culture, they kept language, they kept the character of the Greeks and the culture, but most of the architecture is not to be seen. After the Roman Empire died out, there was a period of the Dark Ages that took everything over. Then you had Byzantine rulers, you had Gothic rulers, you had the Lombard control, and even when they started influencing Naples' Neapolitan life, in the 8th century, the city still retained a lot of the Greek culture. And then along came Frederick. Now, Frederick was a Hohenstaufen dynasty ruler, and he became emperor of the entire South. And he was the one who founded the University of Naples, which is still functioning. It's still a very important university. So he was pretty good for the area. And he was an intellectual. He based himself mostly in Puglia, in the region of Puglia, and that was also, the Greek area. That was Greater Greece, So he really kept started Naples on the road to enlightenment again. So he was very good for Naples. Then his son, Manfred, started to rule, but he didn't last very long. He wasn't that effective. And he was beaten by the first of the Anjou dynasty. Now the Anjou were French. Charles I was the first ruler from the Anjou dynasty. In Italy, in Naples, they call it Angiolino. So it's the, we say in English Angevin, French, they say Anjou, and the Italians Angiolino. And there's a big castle there called the Maschio Angiolino that was built by this Charles I. And there are still a lot of buildings today in Naples intact that are from the Angiolino dynasty. So they were very important architecturally. The church and the chiostro of Santa Chiara, where all these beautiful Majolica hand-painted tiles are, and columns and benches depicting Neapolitan life are there. So there's still a lot from that dynasty that's still available to see. And again, you'll see those in some photos. Their dynasty lasted a number, and we're talking about 11th, 12th century, 11th, 12th, 13th century. They lasted through many centuries, including 2 queens. Unfortunately, one of them, I believe, was Joanna, and she was put to death. But the Angiolino dynasty and the Bourbon dynasty, were the 2 main influences that you can still see in Naples today. And the Bourbon, of course, were the last of the dynastic before the unification. But the last Angiolino king was René. He was deposed by Alfonso I of Aragon. Now you have Aragon today is like part of Spain, but at that time, Aragon, Castile, they were all separate city-states, for another use of a word. And they were the Aragonese, and he was very good for Naples. It became a center for the Italian Renaissance when Alfonso I took over. Writers came, sculptors, painters, musicians really started settling there, and they were bringing Naples back into, to life again. However, when he died, he had a son, and his name was Ferrante. Now, Ferrante was a different character. He was king from 1458 to 1494. And at that same time, the Borgias were ruling Rome, the Pope. Ferrante was in a position where Naples was a very valuable asset and everybody wanted to take her over. She was a kingdom in her own right, but the Milanese wanted her, the popes wanted her, because you had the Sforza dynasty, and then you had the popes, the papal states. So everybody wanted to make a deal with Naples, but at the same time, they really wanted to conquer Naples. So when the Pope, Ferrante was always fighting with the Borgia Pope, Alexander VI, who was, by the way, the father of Lucrezia Borgia. But when the Pope would send his emissaries to talk to him, even when he sent his son Cesare Borgia, Ferrante would first take them to this room. He had a special room in his palazzo in Naples. What the room was consisted of was a big dining table with lots of food sitting there and lots of people around the table. But they just happened to all be dead and were taxidermied or embalmed, whatever you want to call them, because he put them there in the same position that they were in when he poisoned them. And if they said something that he disagreed with, they would get the poison. So he made this little museum to show them, to any new person that came, in other words, this is a warning. If you say anything I don't like, this is how you're going to end up. And so he had this taxidermy museum of human beings sitting in the same clothes that they wore when they came to him. Now they're, embalmed and dead and sitting there with their meal in front of them. And that's how he kept Naples as a kingdom, because everyone was terrified that this would happen to them. So he was pretty smart. But after he died in 1494, the situation in Naples worsened. And between 1494 and 1503, in 9 years, Naples had 7 different rulers. So everything started to go downhill again. The fortunes of Naples never stayed steady at all. So they've always were losing to one ruling group or another if they didn't have a strong leader. Now, next to come after them were the Spaniards. So when the Spanish came, there was no king. They sent a viceroy. The king himself didn't come. They sent a viceroy, and the series of viceroys ruled Naples. So it wasn't very effective in keeping law and order. It wasn't effective in raising the profile of Naples again as a place of intellect or artistry. So it still was going on the downside. However, there was one, his name was Pedro Alvarez de Toledo, and he ruled Naples for about 20 years. And during his time, even though he was a very strict ruler, Naples started to rise. In fact, there's the main street throughout the city today, one of the main streets, is the Via Toledo. It's a big shopping street. And it's named after him because he really did help Naples to rise again. And he also had the Palazzo Reale down in the square, in the main square in the downtown Naples. And from that point all the way up into the central historic district is this Via Toledo. And it's a big shopping street, but off that street are all these little tiny alleys that go back into the deeper part of Naples. And this was where the soldiers used to live. This was built, it's called the Spanish district. And it was the place where the soldiers lived. And the soldiers were there to keep peace and also to protect the king. So that whole period, now it's a period where there's working class, very working class, and poor people live. And it used to be said, oh, don't go into the Spagnoli district because it's dangerous. It's not dangerous. It's narrow. It's kind of dark because this is the place where they were like soldiers' barracks. So the buildings are close together. These are more alleys than streets, although you can't believe the amount of cars that go through there. It's amazing how they even fit. Stores and apartments line the streets, but it's not dangerous. And some of the best, most authentic little restaurants are in the Quartieri Spagnoli. So again, a bad reputation followed, but it's great. But eventually, with him gone and other viceroys taking over, Naples fell back into a weakened economy, more crime, organized crime groups started to really take over the area. So it was also then, that was the time of the Spanish Inquisition. Now, it didn't really take a hold in Naples because the Pope did not have that much influence in the area. And the Neapolitans just were not about to be ruled by, a Pope who said, this is what your faith has to be, and that's it. But what happened is it still caused the intellectual life, because of the churches, it caused the intellectual life of the city to go down. So a lot of the academics went down the tubes. There was the artists just wasn't happening anymore. Eventually, it got so bad. I don't know if people have heard the name Masaniello, but Masaniello was a fisherman who incited this uprising. He was eventually killed, but at least he tried. And there was a short period of time, I don't even think it was more than a couple of months, where it was called the Neapolitan Republic. It didn't last, but it showed that, someone was trying to bring it back. Then the Spanish rule was reinstated, of course, and the poorest people at that time were called Lazzaroni. And they were truly, truly the poor. This is where you get the term the Stugnizi, the street children. They were either orphaned or they were so poor their families would put them out on the streets so that they could beg. But they didn't just beg, they entertained. And this is where you get all this street life from, because they needed to survive. And the Northern European writers who would go on, and the artists who would go on these grand tours would see all this, and they would go back and they would write about these little savages on the streets, or these picturesque poor people who just are entertaining all day, but they're too lazy to work. not thinking there's, why are these people so poor? What could we do about it? They didn't look any deeper than, what they saw. And a lot of the bad reputation for Naples came about because of these Northern European writers. The only one, they called these people, the Lazzaroni, noble savages, which is, such a highly insulting thing to say about people that you know nothing about. But they characterized them as being happy in their ignorance and all of this, which, it's not the way they really were. They were deathly poor. But Goethe came there, and he was in love with Naples. He really did, and he wrote about it. And what he said was, I will quote him. He noted that the general population was sober and never inflamed with strong liquors as they are in northern countries, which meant they weren't drunkards. They weren't drunkards like, the northern countries were known to be. They were poor. They didn't have hardly any food. They begged on the street by trying to be entertaining, but they didn't get drunk. And that really holds true today. So there continued to be all of these wars and changes in rulers for many years until the Bourbon dynasty appeared. And that was with King Carlo in 1734. He finally came and lived in Italy. So he was the first king who came and lived in Naples. He started out as the king in Spain, but he came to live in Naples, and most of what we see today is because of his rule. His mother was Italian. He was Spanish by his father, Philip the Fifth, but his mother was Elizabeth Farnese, so she was Italian, and he was more Italian than Spanish, and by that they meant that he was warmer. He was not the warrior king. He was more peaceful, loving. He wanted Naples to be seen as the kingdom that it should have been seen. So he rebuilt the Palazzo Reale downtown, which is today magnificent, and it's there. He had the opera house, the Teatro San Carlo, which is one of the most beautiful opera houses in the world, and became a center of opera in Naples for many, many years. Verdi and Rossini and all of these people debuted many of their operas at the San Carlo. He was not a big fan of opera, but he felt that it had to be spectacular because it was a kingdom, and it needed to have an opera house befitting a kingdom. So he had this built with a passageway that he could go from the castle into the opera house without going out on the street. And it's, still there. His big love was hunting, and he loved to hunt. He built another palace up in, at that time, what was considered the hinterland of Naples, which is Capodimonte, which now is part of the city, but it's up on the hill. So he built that, which is now a museum, but that was his hunting lodge. And he had it, renovated. And what he started two major art enterprises. And one of them is still really in existence today, and that's the Presepe Napolitano. And that's the Nativity, but more than the Nativity, it uses the birth of Christ set in the city of Naples with all of the characters and all of the occupations that comprise the city of Naples and the occupation of all the people. The spaghetti vendors, the shepherds, and every kind of work that you can imagine was portrayed, and the Christ was put in the center of this. So really the story of the Presepe is really the story of Naples, and it happens to be the place where this baby Jesus was born. But Naples is really the main attraction. And the street where these things are still sold is the Via San Gregorio Armeno. And it's one of my favorite streets. I go there all the time. And what happened was, because the king loved it so much, and he hired the best sculptors and painters and artisans of the day. Giuseppe San Martino, who did the Veiled Christ. I mean, he was one of the most renowned sculptors of his time. He made pieces for the King's Presepe, which are now, by the way, in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art, hanging on the tree. But he, because of the king's interest, so began the interest of the nobility. So they did this and became a big industry, but an artistic industry. And in the 18th century, it brought Naples to the height of her artistic, the pinnacle of her artistry with the Presepe. And today, the pieces, they've gathered back most of the 18th century pieces that were scattered around the world when the nobility had to start selling things because they were losing their money. But the king's 6,000 pieces are all over Naples. The Banco di Napoli bought them back and took them over, and now they're part of the Italian patrimony, and specifically they have to stay in Naples. But you can buy copies of all of these things on the Via San Gregorio Armeno, which before it was the street of the Nativity, it was a street where there were temples at either end. So in pagan times, this was the street where people would go, where pilgrims would go to buy good luck pieces or pieces to put on the altars to worship during the pagan times. So as always in Italy, there are specialized streets for special things. And so this grew out of the pagan merchants to the religion. Now it's not so much a religious thing anymore as it is, it's a Christmas thing, and it's a Neapolitan thing, and it's wonderful. And I have a friend who was from the area who made me my own, and it's 6 feet long, and it's got every scene and houses, and he makes them by hand because he's so in love with this. And I buy all the stuff in Naples and I have it shipped to my house. So Carlo was responsible for this. And also the other thing that he did in Capodimonte, he started a porcelain factory. And they made, I remember as a child seeing in my grandparents' houses and all the old people's houses that I went to, all this Capodimonte porcelain. And it was trimmed in gold, and it was very, very elaborate and very ornate. Well, at one time, this was made in the king's factory up in Capodimonte, and it was just as important to keep the secrets of the porcelain as it was in Venice for the glass blowers. If they gave away the secrets in Venice to how they made all the Venetian glass, they were put to death, and that's part of the reason why they were isolated on the island of Murano. Well, the same thing applied with the Capodimonte. The king said if anybody gives away the secrets of this wonderful porcelain, it was different than any other porcelain that had been seen before, they would be put to death. So when he left in 1854, he was called back to Naples, to Spain, because his father in Spain, or his older brother, died, and he had to go back and take over being king. Now, his oldest son was mentally not fit to be king. So he had to make his younger son, who was a child, he made him king, but he had a regent. So his child, Ferdinand, didn't rule Naples until he grew up. So there were regents in between, and they ruled until he became of age. So he played, and he was much more of a fun-loving guy than he was a serious king. So when he did come of age, he married the Archduchess Maria Carolina, who was the sister of Marie Antoinette. She had a very strong personality, and because of his lack of leadership, she became almost like a de facto ruler because she knew what she wanted and how things should be done. So they ruled together. But he was very much beloved because he was fun. He loved being with the Neapolitan people. He wasn't just interested in the aristocrats and the nobility. He wanted to be amongst the people. So they really, really liked him. Now, in 1806, along comes Napoleon. He takes over Naples. He conquers the kingdom and puts his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, in charge. So he ruled for a while, and then the brother-in-law, Joachim Murat, became the ruler of Naples. And things didn't go that well for the population. But when Napoleon was defeated, Sicily and Naples were rejoined, and they became the kingdom of the two Sicilies. At one point, when this happened, Sicily was the seat of power. Palermo was the seat of power. But when Ferdinand came back from exile, he made Naples the seat of power of the kingdom of the two Sicilies. And he was really welcomed back and popular. Then, you know, along came the idea of unification. Now, Garibaldi came in after Ferdinand died, his children and grandchildren, they were the Bourbon rulers also, but they were not as effective or as important. And then, because he died in 1825, unification didn't happen until 1861. When the unification occurred and Garibaldi came in, the end of the kingdom of the two Sicilies was declared and the new kingdom of Italy began. One of the first signs that this was not going to bode well for the South, and particularly for Naples, is because the former kingdom was forced to contribute 443 million lira to the new government treasury, compared to 224 million from all the other states combined that comprised Italy. So they really took everything from Naples. Naples was a rich kingdom at that time. They took everything. They raped the land and they took it. This caused the southern economy to collapse. So it was the beginning of the mass migration, which started maybe, you know, within 20 years later. So life under that new Savoia rule ravaged the South. And it really, even to this day, you will hear Neapolitans say that that was not unification, that was occupation. They were an occupied nation. No one asked them if they wanted to be made part of Italy, of the whole. They were just occupied, they were taken over. So the resentment really exists once you really start digging deep into this history and talking to people. And even though this is, you know, how many generations removed from that time, they still feel it personally. Like they're, you know, they had a proud kingdom at one time, and now they were taken over by these occupied French king, who was really the ruler of, you know, of a French, the Savoia rulers were French, and they ruled Piemonte, which was practically French. It was, you know, a French city-state in Italy. And the capital for a while was Torino. So it was not unification to them, it was occupation. And they really felt that it ravaged the whole economy, which it did. And once the government took over, they not only took over the money from Naples, they took the Bourbon personal fortune. They took all of their wealth. So they took everything out of Naples. And then the Neapolitans were just left taxation beyond belief. No one could afford to even own their land anymore. And this is what led to the demise of Naples and accordingly the rest of the South. The decline lasted through an entire century. And then during World War II, Naples was the most bombed city in Italy. And aside for other atrocities that were committed there by the Germans, once Italy turned on the German allies, the German bombed the state archives of Naples, so that they lost all archival material from the period of Charles I of Anjouino, through the Aragonese period in the 1400s. So they lost hundreds of years of actual physical materials that they had in their archives. The Germans destroyed 200 years of their factual history. However, Naples was the first city in Italy to turn against the Germans. You've heard of the 4 Days of Naples? There's a film called The 4 Days of Naples that tells the story. The revolt was a people's revolt. It started in the Vomero, which is the hilltop area of Naples, and it was started by the street people. they were, fed up, and they held the Germans at bay for 4 days, which gave the Allies a chance to get in there before the Germans could destroy any more people and any more of the city. So although they didn't overtake the Germans, they held them at bay, including these little street kids called skumitsi. The poverty was so great that there's pictures. You'll see what the city looked like after the bombing. The church and the Chiostro di Santa Chiara, the monastery of Santa Chiara, were totally obliterated. It was a pile of just bombed out building. They redid it. They put it back together. It's amazing because it's so beautiful today. You never know that anything happened to it. So after the war, they abolished the monarchy and established the Republic of Italy. And this form of government didn't help Naples anymore either. It still didn't fare any better. Even to this day, the Northern Italians, and I have friends in both North and South, and those Northern Italians, they are totally against the Neapolitans, even more so than the Sicilian people. They just have a thing about Naples. And, I want to say they this whole idea of, oh, they're lazy, they're outside, they just want to sing and dance and play and do all this. This is absolutely not true, because when those same people that they called lazy had to leave their land because it was so bad, they couldn't make a living, and they came to the United States, they built up the railroads, the buildings. They were stonemasons. They built, there's a saying on Ellis Island, when I was told that the streets in New York were paved with gold. The streets in America were paved with gold. When I arrived here, I found out not only were they not paved with gold, but I was expected to pave them. So these Neapolitans that everyone in the Northern Italy and the English and everybody else said were lazy, they were not lazy. They just needed an opportunity to be put to work and to make a living for their families. So they really, they came here and they built up this country. They contributed, they sacrificed it, they endured, prejudice and overcame discrimination, and they prospered. They weren't lazy, they weren't corrupt, they needed to be given an opportunity. But all this while, as the massive emigration happened, Naples was going down and down and down again. So, there was no point in going. The hotels, even what were called the better hotels, were in a shambles. They just weren't kept up. The palaces, the museums, you could go there and they'd say the hours were from here to there, from 9 to 1. You'd get there and they'd be closed. There'd be no one to open them. So it was very haphazard, and Naples again got the reputation of being, not the place to go. It was dirty. They had garbage strikes, and the Camorra was there. But in 1994, Naples fortunately was selected to be the place where the G7 was going to meet. And because of that, just like with the Olympics, they started building up the city again. They fixed everything. Beautiful piazzas that were one time, absolute gorgeous gathering places were turned into parking lots. And then when the G7 was going to come, they emptied them all out of parking lots. They restored them. They refurbished everything. So in that beautiful communal park that's right in smack in the middle of the city, was built up. People were strolling in the streets again. It was a renaissance for Naples. So that G7 really turned the city around, and the palaces were cleaned up. They hired people to go back into the museums. Everything was cleared of cars. You could go walking along the sea. They made that. The traffic used to be horrendous there. They made it a pedestrian walkway with restaurants lining the streets, looking out over Vesuvio. It's absolutely gorgeous. So that started Naples coming back. And still you had people that were saying, Naples was dangerous. So here we have Megaride. Now we have the Castel dell'Ovo, but you can see it was an island that was attached to land right there going in. And that's where this is Monte Ecchia, also called the Mountain of the Gods. And this is there, underneath is scaffolding now, but there's an entrance there where you could go in and see the tomb of the unknown soldier. And that the whole city's built around it. There's apartment buildings right next door, but there it is. You still have your, yeah, and this is from the water, the Castel dell'Ovo. Virgil's egg is buried under there somewhere. And that's a beautiful scene that you see from a restaurant. Now here where we're down in under the Church of San Lorenzo, where the Greek and Roman ruins are, you can see the bricks, so that's all Roman. There's some more of these. Again, this is a Roman archways that all of these were the marketplace at one time. And here it tells you what a particular room in that underground ruins was. Some were bakeries, some were dry cleaners, some were wineries, and again, you have the market. This is the Maschio Andreino that Charles of Anjou built, but that white piece in the middle there between those two towers, that was added by the Aragonese king. And there's one tower that was missing, they took it off. But that's been there since the Anjou dynasty, the Anjuino. And this is another view of it. Today it's like a museum. Now here is the Chiostro, the monastery of Santa Chiara. You would never think from seeing the pictures at the end how this had been bombed, but all of these columns are hand painted with scenes of Naples. And this is where the nuns used to walk and contemplate and pray, and it's very serene, and you can go in there now. You can't sit on any of these benches, but you walk through there and it's just amazing because it's columns after columns. And, you know, it's just beautiful, a beautiful place. Another view. And this is the Palazzo Reale where the King Carlo reigned. Another view. And here he is. And all these niches in the palace are different rulers, statues of the different rulers of Naples. So there's Carlo. This is one of the staircases going up his palace. It's magnificent. It's a dual staircase. This is the main square. On the right-hand side, as you're looking, you can see some umbrellas. That's a famous Cafe Gambrinus, and that was a literary salon. At one time, all the intellectuals and artists of Naples used to hang out there and have coffee and conversation and eat. And today, it's, you know, very much a place where the Neapolitans go and the tourists go. It's a wonderful place. Here's the San Carlo Opera House. Best opera. It's like going in heaven and then watching the opera. That's the outside of it. Another view of it. It's just absolutely gorgeous. There's the King's Box, the Royal Box. Now this is the entrance to the Capodimonte Museum, which at one time was the hunting lodge palace of King Carlo. And here's a walkway. This is one of the porcelain rooms. There's one whole room that is porcelain from floor to ceiling, and every piece of wall is adorned in porcelain. And this was the period of Baroque. So you have this Neapolitan Baroque style and the Rococo. It's just, you know, it's so over the top. But today it's, you know, much more appreciated than it was maybe, you know, 50 or 60 years ago. Now this is the street of the Via San Gregorio Armeno, the street of the Presepe, and they sell all these nativity scenes that are all hand done. The smaller ones are molded, but all of these bigger figures, they're all handmade and hand painted and dressed in cloth. And there are, you know, different levels of refinement to them, but they're all copies of the 18th century ones that the king and the nobility owned. And instead of Christmas trees, this was what Italians put up for many years. Now they do both. In Naples, they do both, and in other parts of Italy too. Now this is one religious scene, and then this is the tower that's at the middle of the street of the Via San Gregorio Armeno. This is the Galleria Umberto. It was the second indoor mall in the world. The first one is the Vittorio Emanuele in Milano, and then they made one in Naples. And today, one day I walked in there just to go and have a cup of coffee, and what do I see? All these dancers in the middle of the floor doing waltzes They had an orchestra and dancing, so everything goes on here. And they were restoring it. They're still in the process of restoring it because it was black. You couldn't see any of the design. Now you can see how gorgeous the details are. And again, Gambrinus. And that's the interior. That's how formal and, you know, fancy the place was. It was really a true literary salon. And now this is the days before, leading up to the Feast of San Gennaro. People are in medieval costumes and they parade through the streets, and there's music and brass band, and they're, you know, dancing through the streets, and they go to the flag, the banners, and this all leads through the church. It's a marvelous week-long celebration. And there is the bishop, the archbishop, who, usually it's the cardinal, but that particular day, he got overcome with heat. And let me tell you, the devotion of these people, that church is packed and it's hot. And even 3 times a year they do it, September, May, and December. So it's hot in there. And there's San Gennaro. So they bring out the vial of blood to show everyone that the blood liquefied. This is another shrine. There's street shrines all over. Now, these are the side streets in the Centro Storico. They're old, and this is part of the Spanish, the Quartieri Spagnoli, the Spanish district. Restaurants and shops, and, you know, you'll have these balconies of everything. You know, there's the horn. They just adorn everything, and this is in the, you know, the Quartieri Spagnoli and in the old district. In the Chiaia, in the more upscale places, you know, they don't do this. But this is the Neapolitan heart. This is the Neapolitan heart and soul. You have the garlic, you have the lemons, you have everything hanging there. And then you have the baskets that the ladies still lower down to the ground to put money in and to get their goods so they don't have to walk down, you know, 75 steps. It's just an amazing place. Whether you're going to the oldest section, you know, people want to see the clothes hanging. There's your clothing hanging in the old district. A lot of street shrines all over the city, everywhere. And people always putting fresh flowers. Again, it's the humanity. Now, this is an apartment building that was at one time a palazzo. And, you know, it's kind of decrepit, but it's still functional, and it's a beautiful architectural scene. It's a beautiful layout. And I stayed in an apartment. I always stay in an apartment that's very similar to this. And the man who owns all the apartments that he turned into rentals, his grandfather owned the whole building. So, you know, they have money, and that's all fixed up. Here's another one that was fixed up. These are all these magnificent buildings scattered all over Naples. They're just beautiful. Now, this is in the Pina Secca market, which is the biggest outdoor market in Naples. This lady is selling, there's oregano and all kinds of herbs there, and she's selling her garlic. She sits there all day. I bought some garlic. She let me take a picture. I bought some oregano. She let me take another picture. This is the oldest pizzeria in Naples, in the city. And it's the Antica Pizzeria Porta Alba. So it's the oldest one. It's still serving. Now there's Pulcinella. Pulcinella is the mascot. He's the other symbol of Naples besides San Gennaro. And there's one artist. His name is Lello Esposito. And he has a museum of the Pulcinella and San Gennaro Museum. He created this, and it's in the old section. And this is what I love about Naples. I'm walking down the street, and there's the guy playing a Neapolitan song. So, of course, he's singing to me, and I'm dancing in the street, which is, you just can't do that anywhere else. Maybe in Argentina with the tango dancers, but that's it. But this is why I just adore Naples. Now, this is the Funicolare. The first time I went, they still had the old one, which used to like rock back and forth, and you felt like it was never going to chug up that mountain. Now they have a very modern, very smooth ride, and it stops along the way going up the mountain because it takes you up to the Vomero. The last stop is the Vomero Hill, which is high up over Naples, and it's considered the more upscale area. It used to be farmland up there, and you see some beautiful buildings. The designs on the buildings, you know, all this beautiful architecture. And these long, long shutters, that's the French influence that came to Naples on its stayed. This is a typical Neapolitan window treatment. The long, long shutters, you open them and you can step out onto this small Juliet type balcony. But those long shutters, and most of the time they're green, and that's your typical Neapolitan windows treatment. But as you can see, there is some beautiful, look at the details on these buildings. They're really beautiful. They're really beautiful. This is not a city that's, you know, falling apart. This was my favorite thing, and I always wanted to do it. This is the Rampa di San Antonio, and there's 13 switchbacks that go back and forth, and I always wanted to be on it. And the way these drivers can take those turns without backing up, it's incredible. I would live in Naples, but I'd never be able to drive there. Never. You have to be born there to be able to drive there. And again, another beautiful building, that fabulous design on the Via Toledo. Look at these, you know, I just think they're magnificent. Now, this is the building that I stay in. This is where I rent the apartment. And this man's grandfather owned the entire building, which today is like unheard of. But in there are shops and then the apartments.
I was just going to tell you that it's 8 o'clock, and I just was wondering if we should open up to some questions. I'm not sure how many more photos you have.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
Can we skip some of this? Can we skip some? And I just want to show the bombed out area, how bad it was at that time. These are all, you know, scenic views of Mare Chiare. This is the scenes of Naples along the waterfront. Beautiful fish, selling fish on the beach. Again, more scenes.
Beautiful.
The Vomito, the view from up at the top, looking down at the city. You know, there's the Castel dell'Ovo, all those fancy hotels at night. This is at Caserta, another palace that he was here. Look at this. This is what the city looked like after the war.
Wow.
This is what the city, it's amazing that it was ever put back together. So don't say Neapolitans are lazy to me. Look at this. You know, and this is what happened. This is what happened to Naples and why I love it so today. So it's my mission to make sure that people know the true beauty and the treasure that Naples really is. So, and the people, like I said, the people are just phenomenal. They're just so friendly and wonderful, and I love them. So.
Thank you. That was
You're
very,
welcome.
very well done. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just was wondering if you'd like to now unmute yourself and ask some questions. Please feel free.
I have one.
Uh-huh.
Anita, thank you so much. My grandfather's from Naples. My grandma's from Sicily, and I haven't learned about it. I haven't been there, and I just saw this come up on IBC, and I was like, I need to hear this because
Yes,
I don't know much
yes.
about it. But when you say the things about it being like very Italian and very expressive, it makes so much sense to me, knowing my family.
Right, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So I was wondering.
No, I hope you get
Yeah, I think, I will. I definitely will now. Thank you. And I'm from New York as well. My parents are from the Bronx. But I'm a singer. I'm an opera singer. But I've never learned Neapolitan songs. And I'm so embarrassed to say that now. I'm like, how did I not? I know a million opera arias, but I've never learned them. So I'm going to get a book of them, but I'm wondering if you have any like favorite resources or singers.
Ann Beth, I'm going to call on you. Ann Beth, are you there?
Yes, I had to unmute myself, but I didn't
Okay.
want anyone to see what I look like. So how can I help you?
She wanted to know some resources for like learning some arias and books about the opera. You know, Colby's book of opera is a great resource for information about the operas, but to actually learn the music and the lyrics.
I went to school for opera. So
Okay.
I'm an opera singer, but I've never learned Neapolitan songs.
Okay. Well, you can start out by, now years ago, they used to have these books of Neapolitan songs that you would get in the Italian neighborhoods. So if you have any stores like that, or you could go, you know what, go on the internet because when I want to translate song, I put in lyrics for Accarezzami, and the lyrics come up in Italian and in English. Puts, buy a CD of Neapolitan songs, and then when you see the names of the songs, go online and look for lyrics in English of the song in Neapolitan.
Yeah, I bet I can find the music. I just didn't know, like, if I just get a book of Neapolitan songs, like that's.
Well, I haven't even seen them lately anywhere, even in New York. At one time that I had them from like 1960s, but the best thing is, like I said, go on the internet, but listen to the songs first, because they're so beautiful and they're so expressive, really.
If I can suggest, if you could possibly get any, I don't know if they're available now, but Carlo Butti, he was around in the 30s, the 40s. He was considered the Bing Crosby of Italy, and his singing of Neapolitan songs is absolutely beautiful. There are some more modern Neapolitan singers. I don't know their names offhand, but I'll try to get them and get them to Anita, who in turn can get them to you, I'm sure. And if you could get any of their music, you could at least hear it. And it just goes right to the heart.
And the other one, who is not so new, but is, I would say he's probably in his 60s now, is Massimo Ranieri. He is still one of the most popular Neapolitan singers today.
Oh, great. I'll start with them. Thank you.
Yeah, and then another one is Bruno Venturini. And you can get them sometimes on Amazon, but sometimes they're out of print.
Yeah, they're hard to get.
Yeah. If you can get my email from Christina, I can also maybe send you copies. I can have copies made of, I have every Neapolitan song known to mankind. So,
that would be great. Anita, you can probably send them through Christina. We can figure that out for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My email.
When we are done with this presentation, we will be sending out an email. It'll be a few days, but we'll send out an email, and it'll have films, resources of films, songs, and I'll provide Anita's information if you want to contact her. So we will be sending some of that information around to you.
And I also just started, you saw my website, so I have a new website.
Right, I'll provide that as well, Anita. Okay.
That would be great. I do want to say there's another question in the chat, Anita. Can you suggest a good tour to see Naples and the surrounding area? Also, can you get by in Naples with regular Italian? And lastly, how much time do you suggest for people?
Everybody short circuits Naples. If they go, they end up riding through the city or spending one day. You need at least, I would say, minimum 3 days. 3 days, I mean, that's minimum. But, to me, I'd say you need a lot more time. But minimum 3 days to see the highlights. And I can, again, also recommend a tour guide there and even a driver, which makes it quicker to get from one highlight to the other, because it's a big city and a lot of things are not all in one area. So it's hard to walk to see everything. So I can also recommend tour guides in Naples and getting by in English and Italian in Naples. Now remember, practically every Neapolitan either has a relative or a friend who has been to New York or lives in New York or in the United States in some area. So they're very, very steeped in, American culture too. They love their own culture, but they're very steeped in American culture too. So, there's always somebody that knows English words. And I want to say one thing. When people are worried, like they hear about the garbage strike and they hear about all of this stuff, the areas that are affected for things like that, and even, the crime, it's in the far, far outskirts where regular Neapolitans don't even go. As a tourist, you will not encounter this because it's not done in the center of the city. All of these things happen in very poor outskirts, far away from the center of the city. So it's not something that, you even think about.
There's thank you. Another question. Have you ever been to Monte Vergine? My partner Bill has been there. Curious
I
what-
have not been there. I have not been there, but I know of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I know of it. There's so many places of importance, religion-wise, and there's just so many places like that.
Is Lucia still on? Because she might be able to answer that. I don't know
Yeah.
if she's still
Might have
here.
gone early. Yeah. No, I don't see her.
Okay. Any other
Anybody?
questions, comments?
That's all the
Jim,
questions I see.
Oh, we have a hand up, Jim.
Jim,
Oh.
We can't hear you, Jim.
Oh, Jim, you need
Jim
to
here.
Unmute.
unmute your microphone.
We can't hear you.
Oh, can I unmute? I don't think so.
Can you write it, maybe?
Jim, we can't hear your voice. Either you can unmute or type your question. I don't know if he can hear us.
I think he's typing.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's typing. Great, 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 great.
So,
Okay.
yeah. Anita, the presentation was absolutely fabulous. It was, learned a lot about the
Oh, thank you.
history and a little bit of modern day too. So, really
Yeah.
appreciate you staying up late.
Oh, this is not late for me. My night is just beginning. Ask my friend Annbeth, she'll tell you. I'm usually up until about 2 a.m.
Oh,
But then I sleep till 10, so that's the difference.
yeah. So let's see.
Yeah,
if
no,
Jim
this is
comes up.
this is fine for me. I'm just getting going. This is when I start doing all my research, my reading, and my typing. I just work better at night, and there's no distractions.
Oh,
People,
that's true. So here's
All the
Jim's
birds.
question. He has two.
okay.
The museum on Naples is spectacular. It has the best of Pompeii. And
Yes.
the book Gomorrah by Roberto Saviano. What do
Yes.
you think?
Well, the museum is fabulous. It is one of the best museums in the world. And I happened to go there again on a lucky day where they were doing a reenactment of the eruption of Pompeii, of Vesuvius at Pompeii. And I walked in and I heard this roar of a sound. It was unbelievable. And there was films all over of scenes of Vesuvio erupting. And they had the casts of the real Pompeii there, because everything that you see in Pompeii now is a copy, because there were thieves going there and taking all this valuable antiquities out. So everything that you see now there is a copy, and the real stuff is in the museum, the Archaeological Museum of Naples. It's all in there, and it's a magnificent place. But again, that's not something you can do on a 3-day visit. That's something that you do when you've seen all the highlights, and then you can go back there and really spend your time. Gomorrah to me, again, only feeds, it was an informative book, but it only feeds the worst of Naples. It only feeds the part that doesn't affect most people's lives in the sense of the danger and all of this stuff. It just doesn't exist. So I don't like Gomorrah as far as reading that. If you've never been to Naples and have gotten to see it and know the city as it truly is, that's something that I just don't care for. I read it, but I already knew what Naples was really like. So that criminal element, yes, it exists, it's real, but it doesn't affect you as a visitor or your enjoyment of the city. And there's the other museum, I don't know if Jim is familiar with it, the Cappella Sanseverino, and that's where Giuseppe San Martino's Veiled Christ is. I don't have any pictures of it because you're not allowed to take pictures, but if you go online and look up the Veiled Christ, you will see the most magnificent sculpture. Every time I go to Naples, I look at it because I can't believe that it's real. The veil looks transparent, and it's all stone, it's marble.
Wow.
But to me, it's even more meaningful than the Pietà, which Michelangelo is. So this to me is the first and foremost sculpture that I've ever seen. And that's in a little tiny museum and on a side street in the old part of Naples.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a comment here from Patricia Badia Johnson. Sorry, Pat, I botched your name. She says, my grandmother left for America from the Bay of Naples. They had to wait 3 days for the mines to be cleared out of the waters.
That was during World War I.
Wow. Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. I know they endured so much. They really, my grandmother came over on a boat, and I think she said it took them like 18 days or something in steerage, you know, in the worst of the worst. And they came and they thrived.
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes I wish they had stayed. You know, I'd rather be in my beautiful Naples. But it was tough for a period of time. It was. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. This was great.
That's wonderful.
Let's see.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I really appreciate everybody coming on and signing into it.
Yes.
Bravo.
I hope it gives you a positive reason to now, if you're going back to Italy, make Naples part of your trip.
100%.
Will do.
We had one more comment. Alan asked, what is the best Neapolitan street food?
Well, you know, they have what's called pizza portafolio. And pizza portafolio is actually a small personal size pizza, but they fold it in four like a wallet, so that none of the stuff drips or anything. And that is acceptable to eat on the street. So you can eat that pizza portafolio on the street when you're walking. That's major street food. What else? You can have gelato. That's allowed on the street also. It's really kind of frowned upon to eat on the street. They prefer you standing at a counter or sitting at a table. Italians usually stand at a counter, or they have these tall tables now outside where you stand there and you eat, because, you know, they take their food very seriously. And, you know, Christina, you knew my lecture on the Neapolitan cuisine, how seriously they take their food. So to just, you know, pass it off as, oh, I'll just have a sandwich and walk along as no, it's more revered. Food is sacred. But that's one of the best, the pizza portafolio.
And we're hoping to be able to invite Anita back after the first of the year to talk about, to do her food talk on Naples, because it is, Tanya and I have seen it. It's a fabulous presentation. So we'll hopefully get to have you back in 2021.
Absolutely. I'm ready when you are.
Great.
Always.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for all the wonderful questions.
Thank you for all coming. I appreciate it.